Dear students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Mahesh Kalra, Curator Numismatics at the Asiatic Society of Mumbai. Today we are going to do a module on East India Company uniform currency and British India currency, the module under Indian numismatics. So we look at what we are going to today study and understand in this module. Our learning objectives for this module are to highlight the introduction of machine-struck coinage in India by the East India Company in the 19th century and the modernization of Bombay, Calcutta mints in the 1820s with the help of Soho Mint in Birmingham. The module also examines the process of introduction of a uniform coinage by the East India Company in the second quarter of the 19th century. It also looks at the evolution of the British India coinage from the East India Company uniform coinage of 1835 in terms of appearance of the coinage and its metallic composition. So first we'll look at the Soho Mint and its role in the modernization of East India Company coinage. The second quarter of the 18th century basically was the period of Industrial Revolution. This was basically a period of great intellectual ferment in Europe, where scientific-minded individuals took over initiatives to improve all aspects of human life. One such initiative to reform base currency of England came from an individual called Matthew Boulton, a pioneer of Birmingham's metal industry, who combined his efforts with James Watt, the famous pioneer of steam engine, to create the modernized mechanized mint of Soho in 1770s. His machine striking technology was a very new concept which attracted the attention of many foreign players. This included the East India Company officials in London. They were the first to order a large set of machine-struck copper coins for the Indian presidencies, first in 1791 and then in 1794. The arrival of these high-quality base metal coins for circulation in India and the low cost of minting impressed the East India Company enough for them to begin the process of modernization of the company's own mints at Calcutta, Bombay and Madras. Matthew Boulton and James Watt were basically pioneers who came together to modernize the entire coinages. They were also people who actually then began the process of shipping their mints abroad. These are some of the original line drawings of Boulton and the steam engine created with James Watt. And then we are looking at sketches of the original Soho Mint from Birmingham. And these are the East India Bombay copper pies, basically, which were first minted in 1791 and then later in 1794 with the logo of the East India Company, what is known as the EIC bail mark. At the beginning of the 19th century, the East India Company had acquired the control of most of India's hinterland, with the exception of few areas still controlled by the Marathas and the Sikhs in Punjab. By 1806, the East India Company officials had begun to think of a modernized general currency for all of its Indian territories. Here they had imagined an currency which would be current all over the realm without any competing currencies and complex rates of exchange, which had become the norm in the 18th and early 19th centuries. With this aim in mind, the company officials began to modernize the currency of its three presidencies. Thus, with this aim, somewhere in 1820s, the EIC officials approached Boulton's son and successor, Matthew Robinson Boulton, and James Watt's son, James Watt Jr. Thus, they happened to purchase two mints for the Indian mints. A new one was installed at Kolkata and an old one was installed at Bombay in 1829. By 1833, the East India Company also began to standardize the rates of several rupees. We can imagine about 100 kind of rupees were in circulation in India at this period, and these were competing with the official currency of various presidencies. Here the East India Company standardized the rates of exchange with the Sikka rupee of Bengal presidency. The East India Company also standardized the Sikka rupee in its weight and fineness against the rupees of Bombay and Madras Presidency. By the Charter Act of 1833, the East India Company ceased to be an independent commercial body and became an administrative body in charge of His Majesty's Indian territories. This important change, coupled with the Act of 1835, the Act 17 of 1835, came to declare a new silver rupee called as the Company rupee, which was issued with English devices, devoid of any traces of the long Mughal legacy. The weight of the Company rupee was to be 180 troy grain, which comes to about 11.68 grams, with 1 troy grain being equivalent to 0.0648 grams, and this was to have 11 upon 12th purity of silver. The main mover behind the scheme of uniform currency and its implementation was none other than James Prinsep, a dynamic essay master of the Kolkata Mint. He was also the secretary of the Mint Committee, which was basically advising the company on the various changes required for the new Company rupee. Thus, we see that the obverse design chosen by the Mint Committee for its uniform gold and silver coins was an effigy portrait of the reigning monarch. In this case, the first coinage came in name of William IV, who was then ruling England as its king. The first rupee and moher coins thus had the English legend William IV, King. The reverse side was to have a wreath of laurel containing the legend 1 rupee in English and Persian Yek Rupaiya. Around the wreath, East India Company 1835 was enclosed in a highly security new feature called the raised toothed rim. The proposal to issue uniform silver currency was passed as a resolution on the 27th of May 1835, and a proclamation was issued about the new currency in the same year in September, announcing the 3 denominations of the new currency: 1, half and quarter rupee. Thus we see these 3 factions of the rupee: 1 rupee, half rupee and quarter rupee, came to be issued with the same emblems. On the obverse you see the image of William IV along with his English legends, and on the reverse are the devices that I have just described. The EIC also strived very hard to reform the copper coinage of its presidencies. Right from the beginning of 1809, there were proposals to again implement a uniform copper coinage. Thus, under the Act 17 of 1835, 3 denominations were approved: the double pice, also called as half anna, the pice, also called as quarter anna, and the pi, which was 1/12 of an anna, with the coat of arms of the East India Company on the obverse of the coin with its abbreviated Latin motto, and the date 1835. The reverse was also to have the Persian names, a denomination mentioned on the coins as Yek Rupai in the case of 1/4 anna. Also, these had the same security features that were implemented on the silver coins, that is the raised rim, but in this case it was a plain rim, as copper coins were deemed as much cheaper. The Copper Coinage Act was implemented under the Act 21 of 1835, passed by the Legislative Council of India on 7 December 1835. Initially, only the quarter anna came to be issued with the permission for continuation of the earlier coins of the presidencies. Much later, the other coins came into implementation. So thus we see these 3 copper denominations that I've just mentioned with the date 1835 and the various devices of the East India Company. Gold, on the other hand, was also reformed, but under the Act 17 of 1835, 4 denominations were mentioned: the double moher, the 1 moher, 2/3 of a moher, and 1/3 of a moher. The obverse device for all these coins was the same as the silver coins. However, the reverse was changed to a lion with a palm tree, with the background legend East India Company inscribed above, and Persian and English names of the denomination. The reverse design was basically changed with the idea of preventing the gilding of the rupee and people being cheated in that time. The double and one mohur rupees were thus issued in the name of William IV on 1st January 1836 at the fervent urging of Calcutta's merchant community from the Kolkata Mint. These are fine pieces of the 2 mohur and 1 mohur issued in 1836 with the date 1835. Interestingly, the uniform coinage was continuously issued from 1835 to 1840, but the same date 1835 was maintained, and the portrait of William IV was continued despite the accession of his niece as Queen Victoria to the British throne on his death in 1837. The East India Company preferred to continue William's portrait because of difficulties in making a new die due to the late arrival of actual coins of Queen Victoria in Kolkata. To bypass the original Act of 1835, a new Act 31 of 1837 was passed, which removed the provisions of the Act of 1835, which deemed that the portrait of the current reigning monarch ought to be impressed on the uniform coinage. The distance between India and England at that period, with shipping being the only mode of travel, led to the obverse portrait of the Queen Victoria appear only in November 1840 on the coins. The removed sections of Act 17 of 1835 were restored, and silver rupees and its fractions were then issued with the portrait effigy of the new Queen with the date 1840 and title Victoria Queen. This is a very good example in the next slide of the Victoria rupee with the date 1840. In case of the mohurs, there was a delay and they were only issued in 1841. Similarly, a small fraction called the 2 annas was introduced in 1841 along with the mohurs, and these also come with the date of 1841. The copper issues of the East India Company were implemented for a very long time. In 1848, the company decided to reduce the number of silver coins for low denominations and decided to also remove the practice of using cowries as a mode of exchange. A new half pice coin was introduced to actually implement the removal of cowries from circulation. However, the inability of the mints in India to meet this enormous demand for these copper coins led to them being struck in England. The Royal Mint again was unable to meet these requirements and suggested contracts be given to private mints. 2 such mints, Ralph Heaton and Sons and James Watt and Company, agreed to supply these copper coins, although the dies for the coinage were prepared at the Royal Mint of London. In 1857, due to the Indian uprising, there was a lot of pressure for the new coinage in copper. Thus, we find a large number of coins coming from the Soho Mint in 1857 with a very large mintage. Similarly, 1858 quarter anna coins were produced by James Watt and Company, and also other company, Ralph Heaton and Sons, also issued a large number of quarter anna coins. These coins are basically today distinguished by the difference in design of the leaves on the coins. These measures became all the more significant in India due to the upheaval of 1857 and 58, despite the beginning of a new copper mint at Calcutta called as the Copper Mint. Thus we see these are the coins which were issued. Now we look at the coinage of the Imperial British India period. At this period we look at the period beyond 1858. In 1858, the Government of India led to the East India Company handing over the official charge of India to the British Crown. The British Crown created a new department, the India Office, seated in London, headed by the Secretary of State to handle the India affairs, and the Governor General of India was renamed as the Viceroy of India with more powers. The uniform currency introduced by the East India Company in 1835 was a huge success for the British India, and its legacy was continued, and new coins were issued in the name of the Queen with a fixed date of 1862 for a decade or longer to break the nexus of local Indian money changers who charged a commission on older coins. The imperial coinage had the crown bust of Queen Victoria with a Roman legend on the obverse and the name of the denomination along with India 1862 on the reverse. The gold mohr valued at 15 silver rupees was also issued in 1862, but much later, 1870 and 1875, fractions valued at 10, 5 silver rupees were also issued. So we look at the coinages of 1862, the silver rupee, the one mohr of 1862. If you look very closely at the Queen's visage, she appears with a very elaborate dress and a crown. And we look at the 10 rupees and 5 rupees issued in 1870 and 79. In 1877, Queen Victoria assumed the title Empress of India on her coinages, and this title then continued to be taken by all her successors right till the period of 1947. The coinage was then issued every year till 1901 when Queen Victoria died, and her son Edward VII ascended the British throne, assuming the title King Emperor of India along with his British titles. The coins in name of Edward VII have his right-facing right profile without a crown and the legend Edward VII, King and Emperor, and the reverse has a crown on the top with English and Persian legends denoting the denomination flanked by a flower stem design. This was followed on his all silver coinages, whereas the old pattern was continued on the copper coins from the Indian Victorian era. The coinage of Edward VII was continued till his death in 1910 at the age of 60. He had very little time for his Indian territories, which saw the rise of local political movements. His successor, George V, on the other hand, travelled to India in December 1911 and held a Delhi Darbar where he and his royal consort, Queen Mary, were presented to an assembly of Indian princes and dignitaries as Kaisar-e-Hind. The reign of George V saw the First World War. It also had consequences for the Indian economy, chief amongst which was the introduction of Government of India banknotes towards the end of the Great War, with the issue of 1 rupee banknotes in 1917 and a 2.5 rupee banknote in 1918. The 2.5 rupee banknote was issued basically because this was the exchange value of the rupee to the US dollar at that period. The process of introduction of official currency and banknotes was shifted from the Government of India to a new authority towards the fag end of George V's reign. This was the establishment of the Reserve Bank of India on 1st April 1935, just few months before George V's death on 20th January 1936. George's immediate successor, Edward VII, did not rule long enough to basically issue his own coinage because he soon abdicated in favor of his younger brother, who assumed the throne with the name George VI. The new King Emperor began his reign on 11 December 1936. At this period, Europe was again on the verge of a Second World War, which began within 3 years of his reign. The chief impact of the World War II was seen on British Indian silver coinages, as in 1939 the silver 1 rupees were recalled and melted to match the demand of the wartime economy. In 1940 onwards, the Indian rupee began to have 50% silver, with a security edge introduced to prevent its forgery by the Axis powers. The use of half silver was stopped in 1954 and totally suspended in 1945 for the use of cupronickel for the first time in place of silver. Thus, we find George VI issued a final issue in 1947, a cupronickel rupee with an obverse image of the King Emperor with his titles, while the reverse has the image of a lion marching to the left in defiance of the British losses in the war. This issue was continued in circulation in the newly independent states of India and Pakistan. In India, it was continued till the period of 1950 when India became a sovereign republic. These are some of the coinages we have illustrated during the period of British India from 1877 to 1947. Summarizing the talk, the East India Company was responsible for the modernization of the coins of the Indian subcontinent in the 19th century. The East India Company also introduced a uniform currency in 1835 with coins in the name of and images of the British monarch. The East India Company also succeeded in removing the legacy of the Mughals, who had by that time become titular rulers under the company beginning of the 19th century. The Imperial British period was only a continuation of the achievements of the East India Company period, where improved vintage and improved quality of British India coinage through constant innovation became a feature of this currency, which was implemented in India till its independence in 1947. The uniform currency period was also very important for one more change. This was basically the decrease in the use of precious metals in Indian currency, beginning with 1877 till the early 20th century. The amount of gold coinage kept reducing. In the period of George V, very few gold sovereigns are found, and none so whatsoever in the later period of George VI. Also in the war period, we see the replacement of silver with base metals like alloys of cupronickel, quaternary alloy, and various other metals. Even the copper currency was soon replaced by some other lower metals, basically pointing to the arrival of the concept of token coinage. Thus, the coinage of period beyond 1942 can be a very important period in Indian history, because this was the period after World War II when silver was deemed as too costly for the currency. We also find copper becoming very dearer at this period. Thus, we find small cupronickel copper coins with a central hole in the case of the pice. These were basically, the holes were made to basically conserve the amount of copper used in minting these coins. So the Indian people were slowly being trained for what is being used today, that is a token coinage, where the metallic value, the intrinsic metallic value of the coin is not equal to the actual face value of the coin. And this was a very important change which happened in the last phase of uniform currency of the British India. Thank you for watching this module. For more information, visit EPG Pathshala website.